Hello! So this past week I had a bit of an epiphany about how the Hunger Games works so effectively. I'll be pointing specifically to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes throughout this video, partially because it's the most relevant right now, with the whole movie and everything being out. And it's the most fresh in my mind since I just recently read the book and did a book talk wherever that lands on the screen. But it's also genuinely just the most relevant to what I've been thinking about. This is your warning that while I will not be going into deep spoilers about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I'm not going to spoil any major plot points, I will be alluding to some events that happen throughout the story. And by story, I mean literally all 4 of the Hunger Games books. I will be keeping things as vague as possible while still, making it clear for those of us that know the story. And hopefully vague enough that if you don't know the story, you can kind of make sense of what I'm talking about. But by nature of the discussion, there will be some minor spoilers throughout. So this is your warning. If you don't know the Hunger Games and you don't want to know before you've consumed the story, this is your warning. But if you're fine with some very minor spoilers, stick around. Okay, so I will start by backing up. I am taking a folklore class this semester. And while the class itself is focused more on supernatural folklore, local ghost stories and the tales of myth and legend, the class has started with a basic sense of what is folklore. Because on one hand, it seems like such a basic concept. We know what folklore is because we use the term on the regular, but also, do we really actually know what folklore is? So let's just keep in mind that I am only 3 weeks into this one singular class that is my first ever folklore class. If you are a folklorist, don't at me. I have a very rudimentary understanding of this whole field, and it is a whole field. There are people that are getting their masters and doctorates in this field, and I am taking one singular class. But my rudimentary understanding of folklore is that it is part of an informal, traditional culture. Basically, it is the byproduct of a culture that is passed down through non-traditional channels. For example, I've heard stories of universities that have statues on campus, and there is this local legend that if you rub some part of the body of the statue before finals, you will pass all of your classes. Somehow, so many students on campus will know this story even though it's never been written down anywhere. And even though most everyone will tell you that myths like that are not real, that rubbing a statue is not going to magically make you pass all of your classes, there's still that inkling of belief, which is part of what makes the story get passed down from senior to freshman. That is folklore, and compare that to a book that is detailing the history of that particular statue, which is a collection of information that is passed down through a structured channel, a book, which is not folklore. So what does all of this have to do with the Hunger Games? Something that Suzanne Collins does an absolutely amazing job of with the Hunger Games, and particularly with Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, is to give us a sense of the world's folklore. One piece that stands out really sharply to me is the song The Hanging Tree, in part because it is the song that reappears in Mockingjay. Given the clear, technological limitations of District 12, in addition to probably the very severe amount of censorships in whatever traditional media they might be able to scrounge up, it's not likely that this song would have ever have formally been recorded. The Hanging Tree is a song that would have been passed down purely through performance. That is a non-structured channel. And I would assume that the understanding of the song would have also shifted slightly over the years, especially as we pass from the characters of Ballad into the characters from Mockingjay. As an audience member consuming the story world, I do think it's important that Mockingjay came before Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Obviously, we know in the storyline that Mockingjay is 60-ish years later, but for the purposes of what we have consumed in media, it is reversed. But as an audience member, I think it's important because we were able to see the legacy of the song. We see kind of an earlier rendition of it. Because while we are consuming the song and Ballad, we know that this song lives on to reach Katniss in Mockingjay. Not only does it live on, but it is something that is so ingrained in the culture that Katniss lives in that she doesn't even really think about it until she needs it to be a tool of unification. Which Which again, I'll say I only have 3 weeks of experience, and this is something that people like dedicate their lives to, so don't at me if I'm completely off base here. But my understanding is that folklore can be a unifying tool within a culture. Noting that the culture could be as large as a continent or as small as a household, but because folklore is something that is passed along, it is a shared thing within a given culture. It may become in some way part of the identity of the culture, something that they all collectively understand and share because of the fact that it is collectively understood and shared. The other thing about the hanging tree in particular is I think that Snow completely misunderstood it. This song in ballad is used as a message to Snow, which is a conclusion that he was correct about. However, I am struck by the fact that we know when the song is performed, and this is the first time that Snow is hearing the song, but to assume that this was the first performance of the song suggests that it should not have survived to get to Katniss. I say this largely because if Snow was correct and this was the first time this song was performed as a message to him, then it was only ever performed once, and that was in front of the peacekeepers, not the people of the district. And before you at me and say that the song may have been performed at the Hob, remember that almost immediately following this particular performance, there was a change in leadership, meaning the band would have been out of commission at least for a little while. And I feel like if that were the case, a song like The Hanging Tree, if it were truly just a message to begin with, would have been put to the wayside. The interesting thing about Snow is that he is so indoctrinated by the culture and the beliefs and, dare I say, the folklore of the capital, and particularly in the beliefs about the people from the districts and how they are somehow less than the people of the capital. He cannot differentiate messages from legitimate pieces of the culture, which as a reader does make it difficult to do the same thing. Like, because we are seeing the world through Snow's eyes, even though it is technically third person, it's a very close third person, it's difficult to make sense of what is and is not culturally significant in District 12. Yet, I would say that there are enough hints, even with how much he misguides us. We can see that there is a rich culture happening. We can see that even despite the poverty and despair within the district, there is a lot of culture. And it's so interesting to see how that permeates into the original trilogy. Again, especially in Mockingjay, where that culture becomes so important in pulling people together. But I would say even in the earlier books or movies, if you're more of a movie person, I think the expression of culture, especially from District 12, helps to generate empathy, if not sympathy, from the capital, rather the people from the capital. I think they start to realize that the people in the districts are extraordinarily human, and in many ways maybe even more human than the people of the capital themselves. And while we never really get a deep dive into the culture of anywhere in Panem, I think Suzanne Collins gives us enough to make this feel super fleshed out. Obviously, when I dig beyond the surface, I have a lot of questions, but I don't think the questions that I have are bad. It's not like I'm digging a hole in the logic of the world so much as I want more developmental answers. Compare this to Twilight, which we all know I love and adore. It is my favorite hot garbage, but there are a lot of holes in the development, such as the fact that Carlisle supposedly lived in the sewers of London before the sewers of London existed. Like, that's kind of a problem, but The Hunger Games, the questions are more just, I want to have more information, rather than there is a logical issue here. As a writer of primarily contemporary fiction, I find that folklore is difficult to integrate into my stories, partly because the stories that cultures share tend to shift and change really quickly, especially now that we've sort of expanded the culture into like the internet sphere where we have memes and the memes change literally daily. Like, if I say something like, I've given you 1,000 doubloons, a few people will get it. A few people will remember that meme. It lasted literally a weekend on TikTok. If I were to integrate contemporary folklore into my stories as a primarily contemporary fiction writer, I do feel like it would date my story pretty aggressively. But I do feel like if you are writing a story that is like established in a set period of time, like the 2000s or the 1750s, or in the case of Suzanne Collins, creating this alternate universe set in a different time period, such as a dystopia, I do think it's really interesting and important to consider. What are the stories that everybody in a given culture in a given period of time knows? The stories that they know so deeply and that is so ingrained in their world that they don't even stop to question them because that's just the stories that exist. And how do those stories impact them? And this isn't just the media they consume, like the music and the movies and the books, but what stories do they share at mealtime? What songs do they sing to each other while doing the dishes? Songs that have never been like formally recorded, but everybody knows. And you're not really sure how everyone knows. One example that I think of is when I was like middle school age, there was like this huge cultural thing where everybody hated Barney for some reason, and there were at least 2 songs that were spreading like wildfire about killing Barney, and it's kind of disturbing. And I have talked to other people from different states, entirely different states, about these, and they know these songs. There is a Wikipedia page about these songs. I never heard a formal recording of it. It was something that was passed on to me from a friend that I passed on to a few friends because that's what kids do. It's not something that I ever really thought about until I was thinking about like what kind of folklore exists in my life. That would be an example of one. But to be able to integrate those pieces into a story without being excessively expository. Like the narrator should never have to feed the folklore to the reader because it's just a natural part of the culture. And when something is such a natural part of the culture and so ingrained, it's not something that you usually question unless it's the first time you're being exposed to it. And so to let the folklore, whether it be through stories or songs or something else, and to just let the reader naturally discover the history is just beautiful. All of this is to say that the more I think about the Hunger Games, the more I think it's an amazing story, and the more I appreciate all of the moving pieces. I think especially when things become really super popular, people tend to be quick to point out all of the ways that maybe it lacks in originality, or find ways of accusing it of being too woke or too conservative or too similar to this other piece of media that it's just sat there completely forgetting the fact that there's no such thing as an original story. And that genres exist for a reason, and that if something matches something else in a genre, that's usually because it's part of the same genre. And also because people seem to assume that what makes something unique is that the plot itself has to be completely unique, and not that the mechanisms that make this thing operate is the thing that makes it unique. Because unique composition, unique plot does not exist in today's world. Anyways, this has turned into a tangent. I am gonna go. I'll say again, if I have any folklorists in my viewership, don't at me, but do comment on what you think of the folklore of fictional worlds, because I'm interested in knowing what your thoughts are on it. Also, I guess if I have any definitions or descriptions wrong, you can tell me, but be nice, please. I am sensitive. Okay. In any case, I would love to continue this conversation in the comments, so sound off in the comments below with any thoughts, ideas, questions, comments, concerns, complaints that you have. Again, remembering I am a sensitive little marshmallow. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel because I post new videos every week, whatever I'm doing on Wednesdays, and piercings every Friday. And I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!